Good afternoon, and thank you for attending our webinar. We are going to talk today a bit about managing human capital along the lines of not-for-profit organizations. And one of the things we like to do is start this generically, just talking about some best practices, and then at the end actually show you some examples of different types of screens and things and different tools you can use to help manage your human capital. So first of all, let's just define human capital a little bit, and that is those are the people in your organization who you have some control over. So this being the case for not-for-profits, we're mostly going to be talking today about employees and volunteers. So as we go along, I'll define this a little bit more, but the whole idea is we want best practices and ideas for making your organization a place where people want to be. So just a little introduction about our company, Turnkey Technologies. I will be your presenter today. My name is Wendy Enke, and I'm a CPA. I've been a CPA in Missouri for over 20 years and been with Turnkey Technologies for 5. And I also listed Tanya Drake. She was gracious enough to lend us some content from Workforce Go to show some of the screens and tools that we'll be showing toward the end of the webinar. Just a little bit about us is we partner with organizations to help them improve the way they do business, not just in software, but to even think through better processes for their employees and to allow them either greater profitability or, if you're a not-for-profit, a more effective mission. We were founded in 1994 as a service-oriented organization, and we've been providing full-service business process optimization since then. A lot of us are former accountants, CPAs, controllers, and there's a few of us, I'm one of them, who have expertise in not-for-profits, and that is sort of my first love, so to speak. Just a little more about Turnkey Technologies. We do offer finance and operations ERP systems, which are accounting systems. We also offer CRM, which are customer engagement. You know them as donors probably. And we also do implementations of business intelligence and also cloud services. So just a little about us. Our topics today we're going to cover is we're going to kind of go through 5 areas, and the last one will be a question and answer session, which will open probably about 2:45 Central Time or so. We're just going to start with defining human capital and then talk about why managing it is so important. And then we're going to break down categorizing human capital for not-for-profits into 2 main areas, and that is employees and staff and volunteers. And then the last thing we'll discuss are some basic steps to how to document your human capital and how some best practices around how to get started if you haven't done it, or how to make your documentation processes more effective. So what is human capital? I've broken it down into 2 sections in the not-for-profit world. The first one is employees and key staff. So people that your company employs to fulfill your mission and to do a job. This can include employees. It refers to the board of directors, consultants you may hire, and even outside vendors, anybody that you're hiring to do work in your company. And then I kind of threw a separate section to the side, and it's donors and volunteers. Donors aren't necessarily human capital, but they do have a large impact on your organization. And so having a system that keeps track of them and keeps track of their donations and their giving is critically important to your mission. Grant organizations are another if you receive grants as part of your revenue. And then volunteers is an area I was going to highlight. A lot of times volunteers are overlooked in organizations, but many not-for-profits have been able to leverage volunteers to do a lot of heavy lifting for their organization, thereby freeing up a lot of monies that normally would be used on staff to be freed up for the mission. So let's talk a little bit about the mission. The mission of a not-for-profit is defined obviously by what your goals are. So typically in a not-for-profit, when you do reporting, you're required to report on functional expenses and program activities versus G&A and fundraising. And so why is human capital so critical to your mission? The first reason, and one of the main reasons, is that employee costs to train, retain, and replace are typically the most costly expenses in an organization. And what do I mean by that? If you look at the salaries and benefits of employees, they are very expensive compared to a lot of other expenses. Unless you, of course, have old buildings, then you know that any type of old or historic building is also very costly to maintain. But they are, because of just benefits, because of the fact that they interact with your donors and with your volunteers, they're a very important part of your organization and very costly. And I'm sure all of you have seen times when the attitude and work of one employee directly reflects on your organization to potential donors and volunteers. And how many times have you walked into a not-for-profit organization or volunteered to do work for them and you meet up with somebody who has an attitude that is either not welcoming or is negative, and how that has such a potential to affect both donors and volunteers in an organization. So this is one of the reasons why we do want to focus on the human element. And just to back up a little bit, one of the things I do want to stress is that human resources, unlike payroll, generally does not have as much of a financial impact. So as far as your reporting, so typically when a CFO or a controller or a director would look at their financial statements, they're going to see salaries, but they're not going to see other parts of human resources. So human resources is sort of the non-financial aspect of the employee, in the sense that it can be used to track reviews, disciplinary action, termination, certifications, training, everything else. And so when we think of human resources, we tend to think of that as sort of the non-financial aspect of payroll. So most companies that I work with either do payroll in-house or they outsource their payroll. But some companies haven't quite got to the point of where they're actually documenting human resource issues, such as annual reviews, such as onboarding procedures, such as training procedures. And so that's one of the things that we want to kind of talk about today is how do we take that portion of your organization, which is in a lot of cases very subjective, and how do we make it objective? And one of the ways we make it objective is by coming up with review templates and coming up with termination procedures and coming up with job descriptions so that it's very clear to the people you hire exactly what their job is and exactly what they need in order to successfully accomplish their job. So the third bullet point that we're going to talk about a little bit is what is the impact of an underperforming or negative employee? Because anybody who's ever been in the workforce knows how quickly one negative or underperforming employee can affect an entire department if it's not managed. And part of the management of that is actually documenting the job description of an employee. And so by setting into place job descriptions and reviews, therefore you have an objective way of saying to an employee, this is what's expected of you, or this is what you need to be promoted in an organization. And therefore, instead of it becoming or waiting until it becomes an issue where everyone's affected by the employee, can be handled in a quick and less long-term way. I was just thinking of a story recently. So my husband has unfortunately had the opportunity to be involved in several human resource issues this year, and one of them involved the bullying of some employees by another employee, and it was very difficult to really track down because it was sort of a someone said that someone did this, and so basically what they did was they had these employees do a write-up that then went and then it caused the first step of a disciplinary action, so that right away he was able to go to the employee who may or may not have been aware of his actions and said, these things are happening. Because of this, I'm putting a write-up on your record, and therefore, if you want to progress in this organization, you need to change your behavior. And it was kind of a quick, and it was over, and it didn't drag on and on. So we don't like to think of these negative things, but they happen in every organization because we hire people. So creating clear job descriptions. This is another thing that is so important when you're hiring people, that they know exactly what it is that they're supposed to be doing, that you're not just hiring a person to fill a desk, but that you as an organization say, this is our job description. This is what we need to happen in this job. And also to make sure that that employee has a training track. What do they need to do their job? If they're going to be using an accounting system or a computer system, what sort of training do they need? And then what sort of guidance do they need? So to enhance the productivity of the entire organization, writing out job descriptions, making sure people receive the necessary training and then guidance as necessary will greatly enhance productivity and the morale within the organization. So, and then the last point is kind of what I talked about before. Written and enforced procedures can improve efficiency, fight indecision, and aid compliance with applicable laws. So when you think about this, think about just our street and our road signs. Without a written speed limit, without signs telling us what to do, you have all these people on the road. How do we maintain efficiency? Because everybody knows what's expected of them. And that way, it's not, should I go or should I stop? Have you ever seen people at a four-way stop trying to decide who goes first when two people got there at the same time? It sounds like a little thing, but having written enforced procedures such as, what do we do when there's a case where an employee feels bullied or an employee feels like they need some more training? If we have these procedures in place, like where you go, who you talk to, how do you document it, how do you ask, then instead of the organization coming to a halt because nobody knows what to do, nobody knows who to go to, it really helps give everybody a clear sense of direction in where they're going to go, and it also keeps your organization in compliance with laws. So the last slide, I'm sorry, I went a little fast here, was focusing on the first one, which is employees.
I'm doing pretty good.
So next, we're going to talk just a little bit about volunteers. Now, this isn't applicable to every organization, but in very many organizations, volunteers can be a huge cost savings as well as create goodwill. And volunteers are often people who also want to donate financially to an organization. So these people, you cannot overlook the value of a well-trained set of volunteers. Just going down the line, number one, volunteers can be highly experienced and motivated individuals that provide free services and goodwill. So an example are you have people that have been in the business world or have certain skills, and perhaps they're retiring, or they're at a point in their lives when they want to give back, so to speak. They may have more experience than what you could normally hire. In other words, maybe they have experience in the field of law or in the field of business or in some sort of management. And if they will come into an organization and provide you those services for free and with goodwill, and a lot of times that follows donations, you can fill critical experience and budget gaps. So this is an example of where an organization can, instead of outlaying money for that experience, can actually leverage those people to fill in those gaps. And just harping on this as an accountant, every dollar saved means another dollar to fulfill your mission. Every dollar that you don't have to spend on training an employee or on hiring outside to do something means that when you go to report to your donors your functional expenses, it means that a higher percent of their donations actually go to the mission and not to administrative costs. And we know that donors are always looking not only for a mission that they want to donate to, but they also want to donate where they feel that their money is going to be used for the mission and not just for administrative cost. One of the experiences that I enjoyed very, very much years ago was volunteering at a children's hospital here in St. Louis, and they had an excellent volunteer program. They had a volunteer coordinator whose job was to bring in hundreds of volunteers to do everything from tutoring of kids that were out of school and needed help with their homework, to reading to them, to taking them to therapy. And then in the program I was in, it was actually a canine therapy group. So we had what they called teams of support dogs that would come in and do everything from work in the physical therapy department to encourage kids to work through their physical therapy, whether it was walking or touching, to just providing them comfort. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And you know what? They never paid me a dime. But what they did was they had a great volunteer coordinator who kept on track of every volunteer, what their skills were, what their schedule could be, and basically kept that on going. And that hospital had a huge success rate, had a lot of donors, because every time a donor would come in the building, they would see these people in these blue shirts as volunteers doing, like I said, everything from tutoring to reading to wheeling kids back and forth to different, either for test or for therapy. And it was great for the volunteers, but it was also great for the hospital because they got a lot of free services and they didn't have to outlay very much. Just a note on volunteers. Most volunteers do it for thanks and a little recognition. They don't do it for the money. They don't do it for a lot of things. So just a note to remember, thanks and recognition cost very little and go a long way to retaining valuable volunteers. And volunteers are up your organization. And also just a note, even within a human resource module or a human resource piece of software, you can keep different groups. So you can separate volunteers from your staff or from your employees and still keep very valuable information on them. What are their skill sets? What are their hours? What certifications do they have and how they can fill those gaps? So why manage human capital in a nonprofit organization? It's a question that I've heard a lot is that, well, we're sort of a big family and we don't really keep information on reviews, or we don't necessarily have disciplinary actions, or we don't necessarily keep track of why a person has left a position for another position. And so one of the things we wanted to talk about today is unlike a business, most not-for-profits are in business in order to fulfill a mission, whether it's helping homeless or helping refugees that are coming into the country who have very little, whether it's rescuing animals or whether it's anything from big to small, whether it's a religious organization or a higher ed education, it's still involved in, instead of sending money to shareholders, it's involved in fulfilling a mission. So on the slide on the right, I kind of did it backwards. It said 1 to 5, but I was thinking of, as we count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, how can we go from defining a mission and what is the purpose of managing our human capital? So if you start at the right, you can see once the mission is defined and communicated from the top down, then employees are trained and educated in the same mission and then the role to support it. And how is that important? Well, think of an example. If you walk into a Lowe's store or a Walmart store or any kind of store, what are you looking for when you look for an employee? You're looking for somebody who's in a uniform or somebody who represents that company. And in the same way, if you have a clearly defined mission and it's clearly communicated, every employee and volunteer in that organization should be trained and educated on the role so that when they talk to people, when they communicate with people on the phone, when they email people, their mission, the mission keeps getting repeated over and over. And so it's sort of just like a McDonald's. You know, if you've ever been on the road with your kids and they're looking for the golden arches, one of the things that is attractive about McDonald's to people is they always know that it's going to have good coffee, or they always know what the menu is. So in the same way, if you do a good job of defining your mission, every single one of your employees and volunteers is an ambassador to the community for your mission. So then the third step, volunteers recruited and supported in their role. So just like an employee, volunteers should also be educated into the role and mission of the organization so they communicate the same thing. And then when all employees and volunteers consistently communicate that mission, what happens? Donors are attracted and retained because the mission is clear. Everyone repeats that mission all the way from the top to the very bottom of the organization. So although it is relatively easy to measure performance by financial and budgeting reporting, the human element is so uniquely challenging by its very nature. It involves people, and people don't always act the same in certain situations. And when you're training your employees and your volunteers, they need to know what their role is. How are they communicating to everyone they talk to the mission of the organization? And then another point, since employee cost and volunteer expertise have such a large impact on the bottom line and mission delivery, they directly impact your organization's efficiency and sustainability. So, you know, just an example of sustainability, a lot of not-for-profits tend to go out of business once the person who started it, the sponsor, is no longer in the picture. And why is that? That is because people lose sight of that primary mission. And once you lose sight of the mission and you fail to communicate it, donors then are not as likely to want to donate to your organization. They want to go somewhere else where they feel that their dollars are being well used. So one of the reasons we do this is so that we attract donors, so that they want to give money and they want to be a part of the organization because they know that it's going to be handled, and they know that everyone they talk to within the organization, from the person that takes their phone call to the person that sends them statements of donations, that they are hearing the same clear message. And people, while difficult to quantify, matter more than management tools and metrics can show. It is very difficult in a financial system to capture what happens when you have bad morale, what happens when you have poor management. I just went through a case recently with a friend where she hired a moving company to move her antiques. And a bottom line is, because the moving company had not properly managed and trained its employees on how to handle and deal with packing antiques, the company is already on the hook a liability of $60,000 for all of the damage that they did, and where a simple management step of making sure a manager stepped in and made sure the employees were doing their job properly would have resulted in a very successful move instead of where they are now, and that's having lawyers and having insurance companies involved. So, you know, you've heard the saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. By training and making sure you do reviews with your employees, you can fend off a lot of possible issues. So let's talk about some basic steps to document and develop human capital. So the first step is start simple. Okay, if you don't have a formal process right now, maybe you're an organization where you only have 5 to 10 full-time employees, or maybe you're an organization, maybe there's only 2 or 3 of you. Does that require a full-scale human resource and payroll system? No, not necessarily. But start simple. First steps are have procedures for onboarding new employees. Have templates for performance reviews on how people will be graded. And your performance reviews can be different than other organizations. There are a lot of good resources out there, and I will be happy to share them with anybody who wants to email me later. There are books, there are blogs, and there are websites that just talk about what should a performance review look like. It can be something simple. It can be that the employee performs their job as expected or more than expected. It can be that an employee shows respect and consideration for his or her coworkers. It can be that employee is a team player. So they can be very, very basic. But the whole idea is if you make performance reviews standard, then you're not showing favoritism, or you don't appear to show favoritism, because everybody's being graded on the same set of criteria. Disciplinary steps. As much as we hate to think about disciplinary steps, people are people, and people are going to make mistakes. People are going to make presumptions. People are going to get themselves caught in some predicaments. And so disciplinary steps don't necessarily have to be negative. Sometimes it starts with, the first one is a verbal warning. You know, we've asked you when somebody calls in to state the company name, ask how we can help, and we offer to go above and beyond, and this employee has been heard, you know, talking improperly or saying things that are not respectful. And so sometimes it's simple. You just start with, you know, I just wanted to talk to you about this. This does not reflect the values of our organization, and we want to reflect good values in our organizations. And then hopefully that's the end of that, but maybe the next step is that then there's a write-up where they're going to be written up, and then the last step may be that they take a cut in pay, or even that, God forbid, they do not step up and develop, that they need to be terminated. But terminating a bad employee is a whole lot better than losing your company or your mission because you don't want to take those steps to remove a toxic person. So, and termination can refer also not just to someone being fired, but termination can also mean just that the person moved on to another job or quit for a reason. So there should also be termination procedures in place. So the employee turns in their laptop if they have one. The employee turns in their keys. The employee, you know, one of them should be that the IT, who's ever handling IT, should turn off their logins to systems so they can't get back in. And these are just all for the basic prevention of problems by the company. And I said, there's templates out there. You can find templates. You can create their own. But if you have one and every employee knows what the rules are, what the framework is, then again, it gets away from those tendencies to maybe be more favorable toward one employee than another. And so again, it's taking the subjective as much as you can out of what is a very subjective process. Steps, so once you get beyond the basics, then there's also places where in your systems you can keep things such as their skills. Which employee have certain skills? And those are important to know. This is also really important with volunteers. If you have a volunteer that's perhaps has a nursing degree and you're working in an organization where you work with people who are disadvantaged and maybe ill, then maybe that volunteer can be someone who is an advocate for them with a medical personnel. Certifications, degrees, and other information make placing people easier. And so this is not just for employees, this also can be for volunteers. But don't overlook the value that volunteers can bring. Many of them bring degrees and experience with them. Make these somewhat subjective areas as objective as possible. So take the mystery out of them. Don't make an employee guess what they're supposed to be doing or guess what they're going to be graded on or guess what their job description is. Make sure they know up front, this is what we expect. These are the rules of our organization. You know, just simple things. We don't use foul language in the work environment. We are respectful to all of our fellow employees and volunteers. You know, and sometimes it sounds simple, but sometimes it still has to be said. So have a plan to implement and communicate from the top down. So these performance reviews, disciplinary steps, these are things that should have buy-in from the people at the top, where they come up with a list of what they want to do performance reviews on or how they want to do disciplinary steps. And that plan is communicated from the top down. It's communicated to every employee, whether they're new or whether they've been there for a while. And they know exactly what is expected of them. So effective and consistent communication makes for a great organization. And we all know effective and consistent communication is difficult. We think we've done it, and that's where documenting it in the human resource system is so very critical, because if it's documented, it's a whole lot easier to be consistent and effective. So here are some things to just remember as you go about looking at how to really manage and leverage your human capital. Define each position and role, even if it's short and simple. So even if the position is just somebody who greets people at the door and answers the phone, have a short and simple job description and role so they know exactly what their role and position is. Create review templates and allow employees the ability to do self-appraisals and comment on the areas listed. So make it very clear to employees what areas they're going to be graded on, and give them the ability to do their own self-appraisal, and then to also discuss areas where it's not clear. That way, the management and the employees are on the same page, and they understand what is expected, and management is actually grading them on that. It's easy, if it's not written down, to forget and for the rules to change. Provide realistic and achievable job goals and continuing education opportunities. You know, a lot of educational opportunities are free. Today is one example where there are a lot of webinars, there are a lot of blogs, there are a lot of things out there for you to be able to continually educate your employees without having to spend money. So provide realistic and achievable job goals. Give them goals to try to reach for so that they feel like they're not just a cog in the wheel, but they actually have an opportunity to either move up or to cross-train in another job, and that keeps them happy, and it keeps them motivated, and it keeps the organization energized. Document, document, document. if you don't document and record things, guess what? People forget. We do it all the time. There's days when I'm thinking, I know I just sent that email, or I just got that email from somebody 2 days ago, and then I go look and it was 2 weeks ago. And if it weren't for that date stamp on that, I'd be like, I don't believe that. So, we're all busy, and when we're busy, we forget. So document, even if it's a form where you handwrite in it, a review or whatever, document it and then upload copies of those documents to a human resource system or a shared private directory. It will come in handy because there's cases where people don't think to document, or they start to document and then all of a sudden an employee or someone makes a claim, and then there's a legal deposition, and guess what? There's no documents. Having documentation protects your organization against a lot of unnecessary issues and problems. I mean, yes, you can still have a legal claim even if you document, but if you're able to pull out the documents that say, we terminated this employee on this date because of this behavior, or because we found they were embezzling money or whatever, and it's documented, that stops a lot of problems right off the bat. And then another one, not just negative, positive. Look for opportunities to provide low or zero cost benefits. I work with some not-for-profits just as a hobby, and one of the things I talk about a lot is zero cost benefits. Zero cost benefits are friendliness, are mutual respect. If you walk into an organization, and I was thinking today of QT, I've often said, if all organizations were like QT, you walk into QT and I don't care if the person behind the counter knows you or not, or has ever seen you, what is the first thing they say? Hey, glad to see you. And when you leave, what do they say? See you soon. And it sounds like a dumb little thing, but you know what? Often I'll find myself driving past a simple gas station to go to a QT, because when I walk in, I know that they're going to smile, they're going to be friendly, the floors are clean, the bathrooms are clean, and when I leave with a little smile on my face. So think of those zero cost benefits. How can you give your employees benefits that don't cost much money? Flex time, team lunches, occasional opportunities to do team building or service projects as a group. I know some companies where once or twice or a year, they will actually have a service project day where they will pick a place to volunteer, like an animal shelter or whatever, and their employees get part of the day off to actually go together to work as a team with this group. It gets them out of the building, it gets them out of the office, it gets them out of their rut and their 9-to-5 routine, and gives them a chance to work with each other in a more informal setting. And sometimes that team building and that working together can create a real synergy that works for your organization. And then create an atmosphere of clear expectations and reward. Good attitudes and respect cost nothing. And we know it costs nothing, but it's still hard. But a smile goes a long, long way. So this isn't all about spending money. Sometimes it's about creating an atmosphere where people want to work and people want to serve. Again, whether you have a formal or informal human resource process, create a positive and professional atmosphere. Your human capital is one of your greatest assets and can also be one of your greatest liabilities if not handled. So wanted to give you, and this is courtesy of Workforce Go, who has a very excellent HR and payroll software system. It's a little hard to see, but if anybody wants samples, this is just an example of what a performance review looks like within Workforce Go. And here you see properties where you have things like a person's hire date and their status, and you can put in information. So if you look to the right where you see core values, that is an example of a template where a company says, our core values and what we expect you to hit for this particular job are customer service, integrity, excellence, promote growth, and respectful relationships. So that's theirs. And then they have other competencies as they go down. So this one has a little bit more in it, but a typical review doesn't have to have a ton in it. It just has to be consistent. So if you grade one department on professionalism or mutual respect or respect of others, another department is judged and graded the same way. Here's a sample of some performance development, so you can even set up goals for your employees. So maybe you have an employee who does a lot of spreadsheets. So an example of performance development is give them a goal of taking a class or providing a class where they can learn more about the spreadsheet system or the software system that they're in so that they can actually progress and move up in the organization so they can become even a greater asset. So invest in your employees and invest in developing them. And then an example here is just a sample compensation. So there is a part of human resources that actually is financial, and that is the part that links up to compensation. So you will have in a truly good integrated system where compensation and people's pay and people's benefits then flow down from HR down to, say, a CFO dashboard. So another advantage of a really excellent system is one that integrates the two, integrates human resources, payroll, and then where it all ends up in the finances. So you start with the HR piece, which is sort of the human element, and then you move it all the way down to the financial element. And so one system can capture them all for you. So we're just about where we're wrapping it up, and just say a few things, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go into a question and answer session. Thank you for attending today, and I just put a little plug. I say that I've been specializing in nonprofits for over 20 years, but I won't claim any more than that. And our company, we have worked with not-for-profits for a very long time. We share a passion for excellence in helping companies become the best they can be, not just through technology, but through best practices and procedures. So if you have any questions, and I've listed the website there, or if you want to email me, or you're interested in seeing more of the product that we showed today, which was Workforce Go, Tanya's information is in the slide deck as well, and we can make sure you have that. Also, if anybody's interested in getting a hold of any resources, I do have several books that I recommend. I also have a couple of websites that I've found that have been very, very good as far as getting you going on finding templates. And a lot of this is free, so we like the word free. So with that, I'm going to open it up for question and answer.
Hey Wendy, hey everybody, it's Brad Vorbeck with Turnkey here. We don't have any questions at this time, but I think we can leave a couple minutes open for anybody who's thinking of something and might submit it in the questions panel. In the meantime, Wendy, was there anything else that you wanted to add before we totally wrap it up? Or
I didn't. Basically, I guess the only thing I wanted to emphasize again is if you have nothing, you can start informal and move to formal, but in the long run, it's very beneficial to your organization to have these things in place.
okay, well, I think that's it for the questions. It doesn't look like we have any at this time.
Okay.
But
Well, thank you everybody for attending, and you have the email. In fact, what I will do is I will page back up until I get to, whoops, sorry, this page here. If you want to copy down the phone number or the email address and you want to ask any questions, I'd be happy to answer them or point you to resources that'll be helpful.